I will do the best I can to listen and at a good sense. Ultimately, all that we do, whether it's Bishop Malone or even my own presence, the thing that has to ultimately be served is the good of the people of the diocese. My heart just goes out to you, and what I see is a need for a tremendous amount of healing.
Great relief that it has happened, and gratitude that finally, after almost 2 years, Bishop Malone has made the right decision.
Big changes for the Catholic Church here in Buffalo. Bishop Richard Malone has stepped down as leader of the Buffalo Catholic Diocese. The Vatican announced his resignation this morning. Now, we've been waiting for this announcement all week after a second report out of Rome suggested the resignation was coming.
The Vatican's announcement comes after almost 2 years of widespread criticism from his staff, priests, and the public over the way he handled allegations of clergy sexual misconduct. Now, we're continuing our team coverage of this developing story this afternoon. And we go now to News 4's Chris Hervadets, who's been on top of this story, live tweeting updates since early this morning as events unfolded. He's here now to break it all down. Chris?
Hi there, Jackie. Richard Malone was nowhere to be seen today. He was not at the Catholic Center when Albany Bishop Edward Scharfenberger was introduced as the Apostolic Administrator for the Diocese of Buffalo. Scharfenberger will now temporarily lead the diocese until Pope Francis appoints Malone's successor.
Well, I'm not here as a knight in shining armor. I'm not here, as the fix-it man.
But Edward Scharfenberger is now in charge of a diocese in a state of crisis. 600,000 Catholics in Western New York have a new leader as of today.
I come as a healer. Now, I have no white papers, no hidden agenda.
Former Bishop Richard Malone finally gave in after defying calls for his resignation for more than a year and a half. It became official at 6 a.m. Wednesday, but he defended himself to the end. In a 3-page goodbye letter he wrote to Catholics, Malone said of the crisis, "Some have attributed this to my own shortcomings, but the turmoil also reflects the culmination of systemic failings over many years. We have made much progress," he wrote. "Despite the measurable progress we have achieved together, I have concluded after much prayer and discernment that the spiritual welfare of the people of the Diocese of Buffalo will be better served by a new bishop who perhaps is better able to bring about the reconciliation, healing, and renewal that is needed." He called his decision free and said he made it voluntarily.
The Pope understands.
The diocese officially claimed Malone submitted his resignation while he was in Rome during an ad limina trip with New York's other bishops last month. But what Scharfenberger said indicated church officials were already making plans for his departure.
At some point prior to my leaving for the ad limina, I received a call from the Apostolic Nuncio, Bishop Christophe Pierre, that I was being considered as a possible appointee as Apostolic Administrator.
The best way for him to understand it is to personally hear from Catholics in Buffalo, Scharfenberger says. That's what he started doing today. One Catholic he has not heard from, minus a brief conversation in Rome last month, is Richard Malone, who in his letter noted he wants to remain in the area and serve as Bishop Emeritus. Scharfenberger says that will be up to him.
So it's a decision that I would have to make in consultations to whether or not it's appropriate or to what extent it would be appropriate for Bishop Malone to remain in the diocese, to serve in the diocese, under what capacity.
And that's a decision Scharfenberger has not made yet. Remember, he still has his duties as Bishop of Albany, so he only plans to be in Buffalo about 1 day a week. Chris Hervadets, News 4.
Thank you, Chris. Another major issue the diocese is facing is the possibility of bankruptcy. A mountain of lawsuits filed under the Child Victims Act have put the church's financial future at risk of collapse. Bishop Scharfenberger says filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy is an option that he will consider going forward.
Bankruptcy is a specter, and I know there's a lot of concerns about the effects this would have on the lawsuits, the ability of victims to pursue justice, which I'm very sensitive to. There, people who are making use of the CVA. But I also will hear from professionals who understand the process and whether or not it is appropriate, which may well be. That'll be a decision that will be made as quickly as possible with consultation.
The Catholic Diocese of Rochester filed for bankruptcy back in September, 1 month after the Child Victims Act went into effect.
And joining us right now, Buffalo attorney Michael Taheri. Michael, thanks for joining us. We've been here on this sofa before talking about this issue. Let me ask you this. Did this unfold today the way you anticipated?
I think it unfolded a little bit more pleasantly. I think this Bishop Ed from Albany came as a cross as a person who really wants to imitate Jesus. He says, I come as a healer. Jesus came as a healer. We didn't hear that from the predecessor, Bishop Malone. And I think that's a great phrase. I think throughout he talked about Scripture. He talked about wanting to be a listener. I think those are really positive steps. They're great.
One of the things that jumped out at me was he said he'll only be here 1 day a week during this interim period and 4 days in Albany, or the rest of the week in Albany. Does that seem like enough time to deal with the concerns and the issues here?
We have so many things going on. We've got, and he made a very good point about how, as a parish priest, it's important for him to meet parishioners. I don't know if that's going to be able to be done in 1 day a week. You've got to talk with the victims. You've got to talk with suspended priests. You've got to talk with priests who are active in the pulpit. So I think 1 day a week may be aspirational. It may not be realistic.
It was very apparent, though, that Bishop Scharfenberger did his homework before he came here today for this news conference. He talked about the widespread pain with the victims of priest sex abuse in our diocese. And what do you think will be the difference in style of leadership between him and Bishop Malone?
I think going forward as a healer, I think he's going to make affirmative efforts to reach out, to get the input of the victim as how cases should be processed. Let me give you an example. Maybe in the bankruptcy proceeding, as opposed to just relying on the input of the professionals, he's going to talk to the victims and their lawyers and say, here's what I'm hearing from the professionals. What's your view on bankruptcy? Does it help you in the recovery? Does it expedite the processing of these claims? So I think this is the opportunity for this bishop to say, I hear the pain and I can measure it and I want to make it right for you.
And will this interim bishop be the one who makes the decision on bankruptcy?
You've got 1 year, he's here, he presently would have that, he could make that call. I think he can make that call legally as the spiritual leader and administrator of the church. There doesn't seem to be anything holding him back.
And how soon might you expect that?
I think once you, after that 1 year window, and you have an assessment of all the cases that are filed in the diocese, I think then you begin that process. I'm also optimistic, though, and I never had this feeling with Bishop Malone, that he's going to try to assess bankruptcy from the spiritual dimension. What would Jesus do? How do we imitate Jesus in this process? So I think he really wants to, he comes across as a person who is a man of deep faith and wants to heal this diocese.
He also pointed out in his news conference today that he is aware that attendance is down at the churches, at masses, collections are down. Some people are not honoring their pledge to Upon This Rock, the big campaign under Bishop Malone. The question remains, with the church in financial straits, and whether we want to admit it or not, bankruptcy is right around the corner for this diocese. We have got to find a way to heal and to open the doors to the church and welcome people back in.
It's a great point. So this weekend, we should have the fullest Catholic churches we've ever had. This is exactly right. He came to us. The Pope sent Bishop Ed to us. So let's welcome him. Let's all the Catholics go to church and let's fill those pews and make a decision as to whether they want to make a contribution. That's why this is an opportunity for the role of laity to increase in size in the Catholic Church that they've never seen. So Buffalo should be a leader in increasing the activeness of the laity, and I think we should start with this weekend.
Yeah, and I was going to ask for the lay Catholic, someone who's been watching this, someone who's been disillusioned, disappointed, fallen away. What can one person do?
Well, you pray. You come to church. You heard, let's heal together. This is a parish bishop. Nothing could make him feel better about his, assignment in Buffalo than to say, after this first press conference, people are returning to the church. I think the priests are going to echo that message. Come back to church.
Important, Good point. Right from the altar.
Right from the altar.
Starting this weekend. It is Advent.
Yeah.
All right.
So we welcome Christ into our hearts.
We thank you. We thank you for being with us. And of course, as this unfolds, we'll be talking to you more in the future. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, thank you. All right, we have more coverage of this developing story throughout our newscast tonight and, of course, on our website, WIVB.com. But now we're going to turn to the weather as we take a live look over downtown Buffalo. Kind of a miserable day out there. But, Todd, you told us we were going to get these snow showers here and there.
Yeah, and, you know, for this morning, the numbers actually lined up pretty well. I haven't gotten updated numbers for the day. The complicating factor has been what's on the lens of this camera, some of the raindrops that have mixed in. For some areas, even at, 10:45 in the morning, there was another update put out of the Weather Service talking about some rain near the lakeshore, meaning that the models really weren't doing a great job understanding just how deep this warm layer was. And the warmth, I mean, at the surface, temperatures above freezing. The raindrops or snowflakes fall and then melt before they get to the surface. They're starting to mix back over to snow for all areas. So keep in mind, a lot of things like this road here, the 198 at Delaware, you're going to find areas where the sidewalks are still slushy. You'll find a lot of areas where the snow isn't just a nice, fluffy, white coating. It's a slushy type of coating. And that's what we're going to deal with through the evening commute. Looking at it right now, temperatures still above freezing. And we've just been fluctuating between basically 32 briefly late last night, up to 33 and 34, and just kind of hanging out there. So it's been warm enough that some of this has been coming down in the form of rain. And our algorithm is having some trouble. There's still likely some raindrops mixed in, even up around Buffalo. As you work through the evening hours, it switches over to all snow. And notice the northern edge of this line is shifting southward. That's going to be the trend overnight tonight. So points north of Buffalo, there may be a spotty inch kind of here and there, but I don't expect to find much. And if you add in early tomorrow morning, we could find 1 to 2 inches total. The real numbers will be down in the hills. And by hills, I don't mean along the 90 itself. I mean up into the higher elevations of Chautauqua and Cattaraugus County, southern Erie, will find totals upwards of 4 to 8 inches through lunchtime tomorrow. So that's really what we're expecting. And I'll show you the rest of this piece coming up and some totals, but at least during the evening hours, expect to dodge at least a few of these snow showers. Temperatures overnight not going down that low. Most areas only bottoming out a couple degrees below where you are right now. Don, Jackie.
Thank you, Todd. And you can get the latest forecast in the palm of your hand anytime. Just download our News 4 app. It has the latest news, weather, and sports, traffic, and more. It's free for your phone or tablet.
Next on News 4 at 4, we are continuing our team coverage tonight on Bishop Malone's resignation. Coming up, we're going to have reaction from victims of clergy sex abuse who have filed financial lawsuits against the Buffalo Diocese.
Many victims of clergy sexual abuse have come forward in the past 2 years to tell their stories, and hundreds of lawsuits have been filed against the diocese under the Child Victims Act. News 4's Marley Tuskus joins us now with reaction from a victim. Marley?
Jackie, many survivors have told us today is bittersweet for them. While those we spoke with say they are happy this day has finally come, they believe it took too long to reach this point. Survivors were among the first to come forward against the diocese and Bishop Malone, calling what the former bishop did a cover-up. Many have said today's announcement out of the Vatican is the first step in healing, but it will take much more to get the justice they feel they deserve. Now, among the survivors we spoke with is Kevin Kiselniak. He tells me he decided to come forward in order to prevent another child from going through the abuse he faced when he was a teenager. But he says it will be a long time before he feels like he will see change.
And it's only one step of many that need to happen. So I think that, for myself, that this is an important day because it's an important day to continue to move forward and hopefully find the transparency and the honesty and open all of this up. That's what we've been wanting.
Kiselniak says the first step in getting transparency is for the diocese to make the files detailing clergy sex abuse public. He's also among several survivors who have formed a group for victims of sexual abuse to meet and discuss what they've had to deal with. Kiselniak tells me they plan to hold another meeting here in Buffalo next month. In the newsroom, Marley Tuskus, News 4.
This is that first step that we've been waiting for, and it shows, too, that Rome hasn't forgotten about us.
Bishop Malone's former executive assistant turned whistleblower is among those weighing in tonight on the news of his resignation. It was a bittersweet moment for Siobhan O'Connor, and News 4's Katie Alexander joins us now with more.
We need a complete change in leadership here.
That was Siobhan O'Connor outside the diocese headquarters in 2018 after she blew the whistle on her former boss and what she called his mishandling of the sex abuse investigations. Wednesday morning, in the pre-dawn hours, she was in the same spot when she got the news Bishop Richard Malone was stepping down. She called the moment surreal.
I would still be working in that building if he had taken a different course of action.
O'Connor was Bishop Malone's executive assistant. She made copies of documents she says proved Malone was covering up cases of clergy sex abuse. And then, worried more abuse would be allowed if she didn't act, she leaked what she had to the media.
And even just since all those stories broke, his reactions have always been such that I thought, gosh, why won't he just be honest and open with us? And eventually it got to a point where there was just no turning back. There was no salvaging it. And it's really bittersweet that it had to come to this, but I'm grateful that it did, ultimately.
Even now, though, there are concerns about semantics. The Vatican says Malone resigned. Malone says he retired. Like many other victims advocates, Siobhan O'Connor says calling this a retirement is a disservice to survivors.
The retirement, to me, would be an evasive action. It would be a way to skirt around the obvious issue here. Bishop Malone needs to be held accountable for the actions he took or did not take.
O'Connor says Malone stepping down is a vital first step for the Catholic faithful who have had their faith shaken by the scandal.
People are very aware of the dysfunction in the diocese, and they are skeptical about why anyone would remain faithful. And I just keep trying to focus on why I was Catholic in the first place, which was for Jesus, not for Bishop Malone.
Katie Alexander, News 4.
And Father Paul Seil, who has been outspoken during this church crisis, today tweeted the notice that priests received from the Diocese of Buffalo in the wake of Bishop Malone's announcement. That notice says the Vatican has accepted Bishop Emeritus Malone's request for early retirement. Father Seil went on to say that although the diocese is calling this an early retirement, the notice from the Vatican is calling this a resignation. Again, we have much more coverage coming up on News 4 at 4:30 and on our website, social media, and our News 4 app. It's free to download.
Well, more wintry weather is headed our way, and some of the roads are slick out there. Keith Kelly is taking a look at the traffic this afternoon and some of the trouble spots that you could run into on your drive home from work. Keith, good afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon. At this point, yeah, definitely moving under speed for the ride home. Normally, the maps are all green. As you can see, there's some red spots as well as yellow showing that we are moving under speed. Less than 20 minutes along the mainline thruway between the 290 and the 219 in both directions, but still seeing a lot of stop-and-go traffic, especially near the entrance and exit ramps. There's also a crash on the outbound 33, and this is past Eggert Road heading up towards Harlem and Pine Ridge. Center lane is blocked off. Traffic quickly starting to back up, looking at about an 11-minute commute out of downtown. But again, that is going to start to back up even more as traffic heads out of the city on the outbound 33. And we can take a live look outside at some of the congestion, as you can see to the right of the screen there. That is the outbound side there with all the heavier traffic already backing up. A look at the mainline thruway through Cheektowaga right near William Street, and the 190 fills in, especially as you're heading out of downtown. That's northbound direction to the right of the screen. And if you're traveling 190 southbound, watch for this vehicle off on the shoulder there, right near South Ogden Street. Don and Jackie, back to you.
All right, Keith.
A little bit slick out there.
I did a little shoveling today. Not a lot, but a little. And it was very wet, very heavy snow, Todd.
Yep. It's worth clearing off steps and that kind of thing. A lot of areas will at least get back to right around the freezing mark tonight. We're not going to see temperatures come crashing down, which is a great thing because my own driveway is about a half-inch worth of just slush. That's kind of horrifying if that freezes. We haven't gotten any new snowfall totals in from the Weather Service since 9 o'clock this morning. So I didn't want to show those because the highest number there was 3.3 inches. This out of Lancaster just got this from Gabby Mediak, who works for us. Of course, there it looks like more than 3 inches. So for what it's worth, there have been a few areas that have stayed more on the snow side of things. So if you're a spotter for the Weather Service, you do a great thing to help them out by giving some snow totals this evening, because it's been highly variable across western New York. Earlier on this morning, there was, at one point, I was up at Sheridan in Delaware, and it was pouring rain. And that was pretty far inland from the lake. And I will say, none of our models kept the rain chance in that far. And that was around almost lunchtime today. So it's been sloppy, to say the least. Looking at temperatures, just kind of hovering around 34 right now for a lot of areas in our northern counties. Notice it's cooler in the hills. That's key, because over the next couple of hours, you can already see the winds have shifted to the west here over Lake Erie. We're going to see the focus for the snow shifting down toward the hills. And that's where we'll end up with some of those better totals that we were talking about yesterday. We weren't expecting any big totals overnight into this morning or this morning into really this afternoon, but overnight tonight is where this thing starts to ramp up for at least a few areas. And I'll start by saying it's some of the usual suspects, but for what it's worth, even here where we have some maybe raindrops still mixing in up around Buffalo, you have a couple pockets here down in the hills and even along the thruway itself where we may have visibility dropping below a mile. For the most part, I've seen visibility over a mile. So a lot of this has been light, but it's continued through a good stretch of the day. And if you can see the northern edge of that, it is slowly settling down closer toward the city itself. Overnight, we'll see the focus mostly down across the hills, and you still at least see some of that falling there now. This is what it looks like in the model, where it keeps trying to shove the showers, snow showers to the south. We still will have room for some minor snow here and there, even up around Buffalo, even Grand Island. But for the most part, I'm keeping the numbers, especially for tonight, up limited to about an inch. That's really it. In the hills where it's already colder and the ground is colder, you have a better chance of stacking it up some more. Into tomorrow morning, so this 6 a.m., we'll find some minor additional amounts of snow adding up, but by the time you get to the afternoon, snow chances fade, and then we'll be kind of taking a deep breath, and then as we get into Friday, we have another system that'll roll in with some rain and some snow. That looks like a general 1 to 3 inch type system. But for tonight into, say, tomorrow, and as I mentioned, most of this ends before, say, lunchtime tomorrow, but I just carried it through 7 p.m. You can see some of those better totals in the hills. So from the south side of Springville down into especially Cattaraugus County and the higher elevations of Chautauqua, you'll find the better totals, not out of the question. Places like Hamburg are likely closer to the 1 to 2, 1 to 3 inch range, and then you get up into the Boston Hills, and that's where those numbers reach around the 3 to 6 range. So that's what we're thinking we're going to have to deal with for a lot of areas. And that's where we have that lining up with the winter weather advisory as well. It includes western portions and southwestern portions of Wyoming County as well. So certainly be ready to deal with that as you drive later tonight or especially early tomorrow. There are temperatures. I wish I could say it was a little more clear cut for some areas, but we'll see some spots, especially right along the thruway, that sit right around that freezing mark, maybe a degree above it overnight. Tomorrow, daytime highs at best into the mid-30s. Could see winds late night tonight and early tomorrow, gusting near 30 miles per hour, too. So a little miserable to be outdoors. Quieting down tomorrow afternoon. Friday, get back into that minor rain snow chance with some of the minor accumulation. Quiet for the weekend, and then warmer, at least for early this coming week. Don, Jackie.
Thank you, Todd. A partial building collapse closed part of Ellicott Street in Buffalo this morning. Crews are working to stop that crumbling building from damaging others. It happened right next to the popular restaurant Touton. An emergency demolition has been ordered, but in the meantime, business owners inside that building and nearby say this will have a big impact on their customers.
This literally happened within minutes and shut our business down. And we have been struggling to open up a new location, and we were about to do that. We were actually going to be moving out next week.
We're supposed to be open today and tomorrow, and obviously holiday hours, and we got a lot of reservations, so gift cards, all that stuff. So it's a tough day. We're going to call everybody off today and tomorrow. We got a decent amount of product that we're going to have to worry about, but as long as nobody was hurt, Jesus.
News 4's Al Vaughters is following this story. He'll have much more for us coming up on News 4 at 5. Well, next on News 4 at 4, a warning from Niagara County health officials. They say someone at a Taco Bell restaurant tested positive for hepatitis A.
So we're going to show you where it happened and where you can go to get vaccinated if you think you've been exposed.
The Niagara County Department of Health says a worker at a local Taco Bell tested positive for hepatitis A. This involves the restaurant on Niagara Falls Boulevard in Niagara Falls. Now, anyone who ate food from that Taco Bell or used the restroom there between November 21st and December 1st could be affected. A free vaccine clinic for those customers and others affected will be held tomorrow and Friday. We have more information about this on our website, WIVB.com. And this week is National Influenza Vaccination Week.
And Erie County Executive Mark Poloncarz received his shot during an event today in Buffalo. Poloncarz said it's important to remind everyone to get the flu vaccine to protect everyone in our community. The Erie County Health Commissioner, Dr. Gail Burstein, says that there have been several people diagnosed already with the flu this year.
You know, we usually see peak flu in Western New York sometime around the end of January or beginning of February, but sometimes it comes very, very early, like in the beginning of January, and sometimes it can last like throughout the spring up until May.
County health officials are recommending everyone 6 months old or older to get a flu shot. Up next, more coverage on Bishop Richard Malone's resignation. We are speaking with a priest tonight who has been critical of Bishop Malone when News 4 at 4 continues.
And we are continuing to follow Bishop Richard Malone's decision to step down from his post as head of the Buffalo Catholic Diocese.
The Vatican confirmed the resignation this morning, and we learned when he was in Rome last month, Bishop Malone asked Pope Francis to allow him to retire early as he faced criticism for his handling of the clergy's sex abuse crisis here in Buffalo. For almost 2 years, he denied all those calls to resign, but that ended today. Bishop Malone released a letter to the Catholics saying in part, despite the measurable progress we've achieved together, I have concluded after much prayer and discernment that the spiritual welfare of the people of the Diocese of Buffalo will be better served by a new bishop. Albany Bishop Edward Scharfenberger will take his place until a permanent replacement is chosen.
Well, Bishop Scharfenberger says he's not the next bishop of Buffalo, and it will take some time before the next one is named. The process involves the other New York State bishops voting on a list that's eventually sent to the Pope. Bishop Scharfenberger says he will play a role in the selection.
I would be one of the bishops that would be able to propose names of potential candidates to be ordained to the episcopacy. And I can, I don't want to go into a lecture right here, but you'll see specifically bishops will be asked, who would you think would be a good auxiliary bishop? Who do you think would be a good bishop of a diocese? So it does get into great detail.
The diocese says it often takes 6 to 8 months to select a new bishop. Well, finding some measure of justice has been a long time coming for the hundreds who claim they were sexually abused by clergy. News 4's Gabrielle Mediak has reaction from a sexual abuse survivor and his attorney.
It's a new day for the Diocese of Buffalo. The bishop says retirement. The Vatican says resignation. It's pretty clear they're having a hard time getting their story straight, but no matter what, the need in the Diocese of Buffalo was for Bishop Malone to go. He'd lost the flock.
Attorney Steve Boyd represents hundreds with claims against the Buffalo and Rochester diocese. He says Malone stepping down is finally some measure of justice for his clients.
He couldn't be the one to take this diocese to a new place, a place of healing, a place of transparency.
Transparency, something child sex abuse victim Gary Astridge says the diocese has been lacking for decades. He says he was just 7 years old when Father Edward Townsend began abusing him.
It just started with fondling at an early age and then just went from episodes in the school, in his car, and it just got worse with involving rapes and things, and it didn't end until my parents moved from Buffalo to the suburbs.
He and his attorney agree Malone's resignation is a step toward trying to right the ship, but more needs to be done in this next regime.
When the survivors were kids, they had no voice. And in the last couple of years, they've now had a voice, and the Child Victims Act gives them a voice. The diocese needs to acknowledge that voice in a truthful way.
Astridge has been one of the most outspoken members of the movement for change.
I just feel things happen for a reason, and how do I turn something negative into something positive, and this is my way of trying to do that.
He hopes Malone stepping down will help other abuse victims come forward, and that just like him, speaking out will help them begin their healing process.
It's therapy, really, because it's the little boy that was so quiet and never said anything. I can speak up for him.
What would you tell little you right now?
I'm fighting for you, Gary. That's it.
One of many heartbreaking stories. That was Gabrielle Mediak reporting. And since that look-back window opened under the Child Victims Act, the Buffalo Diocese has been named in hundreds of lawsuits. Attorney Steve Boyd says more people have come forward just about every day, and he hopes they will continue to do so.
Several Buffalo priests have shown support for Bishop Malone, but some of them have also been calling for him to resign. News 4's Shannon Smith has reaction from one of those more vocal priests tonight. Shannon?
Well, Don, for some priests, this resignation is a welcomed relief, though they found out about it through news reports. Father Paul Sile says today's a new day here in Buffalo, one that he says means change.
It shows hope for the Diocese of Buffalo.
Hope and healing. That's what Father Paul Sile believes is in store for the Catholic community in Buffalo. This after learning of Bishop Richard Malone's resignation Wednesday.
There was not any direct notice except from the Chancery.
Father Sile, pastor of St. Bernadette Church in Orchard Park, says this email was the only notice Buffalo priests received from the diocese. It was sent Wednesday morning. In it, the diocese says Pope Francis accepted Malone's request for an early retirement. It also instructs priests on moving forward.
And that we were to, drop the name of Bishop Malone from what we call the Eucharistic prayer, the prayer at the Mass, that it should just be left blank at this time.
Father Sile says he's spoken with several priests since the news broke. He says there hasn't been much communication between the priests and Bishop Malone.
It's almost like we've just all exhaled, very deeply, saying, well, that part's over now. Let's see what we can do together.
He says after nearly 2 years, many of them were prepared for this moment.
That allows for a new day, a fresh start in some ways.
As for what that fresh start looks like, Sile says it'll involve change, something he says many priests and parishioners have been praying for.
Now it's a process. We'll be involved in that process wherever we're asked, but many of us will just really be back in our parishes, as we always have been, doing the work that we need to do to heal, to preach, to teach, to spread the gospel.
Now, I reached out to other priests, but didn't hear back tonight. Father Sile says he hasn't personally met Bishop Scharfenberger yet, but he tells me there was a conference call between priests and Bishop Scharfenberger earlier this afternoon. Shannon Smith, News 4.
Thank you, Shannon. And we have much more coverage on this developing story on our website. You can download the free News 4 app for breaking news push alerts. Let's turn now to Buffalo's most accurate forecast as we take a live look over downtown Buffalo, if we can see through the raindrops or the snowdrops on the lens there.
The good news is for most of us in the metro area, we've seen the worst of this blast of winter, but that's not the case for some others, right, Todd?
No, and that's why last night we were trying to take those bite-sized snow pieces, because now is really where we're going to shift this down into the hills. From the Boston Hills southward, Springville, and extending down into the Chautauqua Escarpment, you'll find some of the better totals from tonight into tomorrow. I chose the 400 cam at Transit just because this is just one of the areas where we're going to be doing this slog drive where you have conditions that are wet and just kind of sloppy. There is slush out there for a lot of areas, and we've even found that up around the city itself. Temperature-wise, this has been the trickiest piece of this whole forecast, that we had expected to, get through the day with some rain mixing in near the lakeshore. Well, that stretched inland for some pretty good distances. I mean, even into places like Kenmore or North Buffalo, we're finding still rain mixing in this afternoon. So that kept the totals down for some of you. Places that it didn't rain as much, Lancaster, your totals went up. So we're dealing with still very borderline temperatures for a snow event. I mean, it's 34 degrees and it's still snowing at the airport right now. It's just starting to fade its way south of the airport, but you can kind of see the northern edge of that band. It's not pure lake effect. It's still lake enhanced, but for what it's worth, it is tapping into the lake for some additional moisture, and that's where we're really going to end up with the higher elevations tonight, ending up with some better totals. Up around the city, right now it's fading south, but it's not out of the question to briefly get in and out of a little pocket of snow into early tomorrow there. You might find dusting to an inch type numbers. Where here, from tonight, just the overnight hours, higher elevations could find around 3 to 5 inches. Add another 1 to 3 early tomorrow, and that's how you get to these numbers that run through 10 a.m. Thursday. And, the model, I'll focus more on this coming up, but it does do a pretty good job, I think, of keeping the snow limited to the areas where we're going to see the better opportunities through early tomorrow morning to get some of those additional totals. Tonight, temperatures pretty much stay borderline across West New York. A lot of us getting back to just barely the freezing mark. We'll talk more about some numbers and then take a closer look ahead to the rest of the week coming up. Don, Jackie.
Thank you, Todd. And you can always check the forecast whenever you're on the go. Our Forewarn weather app has live Doppler radar and weather updates anytime, anywhere. It's also free for any mobile device. There's a guilty verdict tonight in a drive-by shooting that left one teen dead and 2 others wounded.
George Rickard has more on this case, which stems from a shooting outside the Northwest Buffalo Community Center last March. George?
Well, Jackie, this teenager opted not to have a jury trial. So this afternoon, State Supreme Court Justice Russell Buscaglia handed down a bench verdict against 19-year-old Jesus Bermudez, finding him guilty of murder and attempted murder for that shooting. It happened the night of March 8th. A group of teens had tried to get into a private party inside the Northwest Buffalo Community Center. They were turned away, and as they were walking away, Bermudez rolled down the window of a car he was riding in and fired 7 shots, killed 17-year-old Deron Allen, and wounded 2 16-year-olds. District Attorney John Flynn says even after Bermudez was in jail, he tried to threaten witnesses not to testify against him.
They still came in and testified against the defendant. So I give all 4 of these young men a tremendous amount of credit and a tremendous amount of guts for doing the right thing and coming in here and testify against the defendant.
We thought that there was extensive reasonable doubt here. We feel that the wrong person was put on trial. We feel that it was the wrong decision, and we definitely will appeal.
Judge Buscaglia scheduled sentencing for January 29th, taking into account the conviction on murder, 2 counts of attempted murder, and criminal possession of a weapon. Bermudez could face up to 75 years to life in prison. George Rickard, News 4.
Thank you, George. Next on News 4 at 4, Bills fans can buy tickets to the playoffs starting tomorrow. We'll tell you the odds of the team making it to the postseason. Oh, yeah.
We have a lot more ahead for you on News 4 at 4.
But first, let's take a look and find out what's coming up tonight at 5 and 6. We're going to continue our team coverage on the resignation of Bishop Richard Malone. We're going to hear from clergy abuse survivors who say today's announcement is indeed a step in the right direction. Plus, diocese whistleblower Siobhan O'Connor will be live in studio to discuss her history with the church and what the resignation means for the future.
And then at 6, we're taking a look at the picture painted by former Bishop Malone about his future and the steps the apostolic administrator says were taken to bring the diocese to this point. Other news now, there is some good news for Buffalo Bills fans who are catching playoff fever. They'll have the opportunity to get ahead of the game. News 4's Angelica Morrison tells us how. Angelica?
That's right, Jackie. It's not a sure bet, but the Bills have a chance of getting into the playoffs. And if fans are really confident, they can buy tickets starting tomorrow. The Buffalo Bills spokesperson confirmed today that tickets for the team's playoff game will go on sale tomorrow. An NFL policy that went into effect this year enabled the early sale of the tickets. Even still, many local sports fans are split on if buying the tickets tomorrow is a good bet.
I think it's a little early. Let's see what's happening when we get done with Pittsburgh.
I think this team has been playing phenomenally well, and I think they just have a lot of heart. And I don't know, I always like to be more positive about things than negative, so I think we have a really great shot.
Now, according to the NFL's website, there is a scenario where the Bills could clinch a spot in the playoff. That scenario is a Buffalo win, an Oakland loss or tie, a Houston loss, and an Indiana loss or tie. In the studio, Angelica Morrison, News 4.
Oh, I hope there's not a test on that, Angelica. Keith Kelly is in with a look at traffic this afternoon and the trouble spots you could run into on your drive home from work. Keith, hello.
Hey, good afternoon, Jackie. Yeah, still looking at a slow drive across most of the majors because of some slick spots and wet roadways. Buffalo police are reminding us that in the city, Ellicott Street is closed between Chippewa and Tupper because of a partial building collapse from this morning. And some of our drive times, less than 20 minutes if you're traveling on the mainline thruway through Cheektowaga between the 290 and 219 in both directions. About a 13-minute commute on the outbound 33 to the thruway and 18 minutes on the 190 north, moving quite slow out of downtown. We can take a live look outside at the 190 northbound as you can see all the brake lights heading up towards Niagara Street as you're leaving the city. And here's a look on the 190 right near Austin Street. Outbound 33, some of the congestion there with all those brake lights heading off to the right of the screen. They're up to the thruway, and the thruway is still seeing some company through Cheektowaga. Back to you.
Thank you, Keith. And
Not
you
bad.
can see the roads there. They're wet. I don't know how
But they're
slick
moving.
they are
They're
at this
moving.
point. They're moving along.
Slushy. A lot of areas just have slush. I mean, we managed to get a pretty interesting record was broken today. We broke a rainfall record instead of a snowfall record. We still, despite getting, technically it went up to 1.07. So for what it's worth, this is going to update shortly, but I wanted to show it because even this number is beyond the record. The record was 0.97, set back 128 years ago. Today we've had 1.07. So that'll update shortly, but I at least wanted to share that that's what happens when the lake gets involved. And in this case, even with that much rainfall, we still managed to achieve 2.9 inches worth of snow at the airport. So that's, again, a substantial thing. And this is the fine line we've been working with this forecast. So those areas where it stayed all snow and your numbers went a little bit higher than the forecast, yeah, that's the trickiness with this type of a thing. It's so borderline. It's still snowing. It's 34 degrees in Buffalo, 37 in Dunkirk. And a lot of areas in the hills where it stayed below freezing all day are now going to take the real focus of this event. So that's where we are at the moment. Lake temperatures, for what it's worth, are right on average. Winds have shifted more to the west over the lake, and that's helping to kind of shove the snow down to the south. That said, you know, and you just saw in some of Keith's imagery there that we still have a lot of wet roads, a lot of slushy conditions where you wet down the snow that did fall. But just over this last hour, notice how the the northern piece of that has gone from around North Buffalo, even up toward near the Wheatfield area, settling southward. We're going to now see that focus in the hills. And while down along the thruway there may still be some raindrops mixing in, we're cooling off at the cloud level, so that is helping to kind of get rid of the rain and just switch us over to all snow chances. The models that we have really focus this mostly on the hills, but I do want to still stress that there is room for some limited snow even up toward Buffalo. I've left room for up to an inch tonight for areas around and just barely, say, our northern suburbs, not all the way up toward Lockport. There I have you in the dusting. But there is room for some minor additional snow. The hills will find upwards of 3 to 5 tonight and then an additional 1 to 3 tomorrow. And I'll show you where that ends up, but at least wanted to say it as I'm showing it here. By tomorrow afternoon, we get some breaks in the clouds, definitely a break in the snow, and then we'll take a deep breath and we get into Friday and another system rolls through with another snow and rain chance. I will say this ahead of time. Friday's system looks like a widespread 1 to upwards of 3 inches. This is a little bit different. So this takes you through 7 p.m. tomorrow. Most of this falls overnight tonight with, as you just saw in the model there, kind of fades out slowly as we hit, say, late morning tomorrow. But in the hills, by the time this is all said and done, it adds up to some pretty decent numbers, including right along ski country. Hamburg itself's likely in that 1 to 3 inch range, and then you head up into the hills, Boston Hills, you find better numbers. South edge of Springville may go into the edge of that 4 to 8. You can kind of see that just getting north into the southern Erie County line there. So winter weather advisories cover those snowfall amounts. I wouldn't be as concerned down along the thruway itself, but you just saw some minor additional totals there. These advisories are really for the higher elevations where you can end up with those better totals. There's tonight. Temperatures stay borderline. I mean, down in the hills, we stay easily cold enough for all of it to stay in the form of snow. But, areas right near the lake, like Dunkirk, may only bottom out around 33. Tomorrow, the coolest hills only get up to around 30. So any snow that continues to fall will stick there. We'll see some slightly milder numbers north, and winds could gust upwards of 30 miles per hour from late night tonight through early tomorrow. Friday, we get that snow-rain mix with some, again, this minor kind of slushy accumulation. Good news is it clears out in time for the weekend, and aside for some breezy conditions on Sunday, looks beautiful for the game. Get into Monday, we return into some rain chances. Tuesday, start with rain, cool down in the middle of the day, and switch over to more snow. Don, Jackie.
Thank you, Todd. And next on News 4 at 4, new U.S. tariffs are hitting one of Europe's favorite products. We'll tell you why Spanish wine is now costing more.